my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Welcome to small town Canada, where the sun has finally decided to come out. We've had a cold snap and lots of snow for the past week and change. So it's nice to have a change of scenery, even if it isn't warm enough that it's going to melt anything. We got a lot of snow. It's not going anywhere, unfortunately. And for all of these books, just remember that I also have a weekly reads. So this is going to be quite quick. It'll be as succinct as I can get. And then the weekly reads will be more in depth. And then if I do a standalone review on anything, that will be, obviously the most. First, I read My Monticello by Jocelyn, Nicole, Johnson. This was a 4-star read. I quite enjoyed it. This book moves from historical fiction in a very clever way to unfurling apocalypse, basically, in which it reminded me a lot of Parable of the Sower, basically. So if you've ever read that, how astute the narrator's view of racial tensions, racial divides, racially charged situations are in that book, and how effective it is at commenting on racism. It's similar to that with a different bent. Then I read Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. This is another 4-star book for me, so it exceeded my expectations, which was pretty high. Everybody was raving about this book, right? I thought it was well executed, but the voice in particular didn't particularly stand out to me as it should if I am going to connect with it. I am kind of big into a very kind of specific prose, I guess, like descriptive writing, high specificity, very active language, and this just isn't that. But the voice does suit the characters, who are 51-year-old pair of twins. Their mother dies. They start uncovering unsettling things about their mother, who has kept things from them ostensibly for good reasons. But the main chunk of the narration is to make you think about how parenthood in relation to children, even when people are this old, can be very tumultuous and kind of robs children of their agency. And there's obviously a lot more going on in this story than that, but that's my main takeaway from it, which I hadn't really seen. And I really like protagonists that are older in age and depicted very soulfully and interestingly, and not very one-dimensional like in most fiction. So I definitely recommend it. I would just say that for me the writing was a little bit uneven, and the plot was very predictable and sort of languid in getting there. Next, I read Death on the Nile, a Hercule, a Poirot mystery by Agatha Christie. I gave this 3 stars. I thought it was fine. The problem is that it retreads a lot of ground when it continually goes over the events in fairly granular detail with all of the suspects, of whom there are many. So it quickly went from fun to very tedious, and then sort of fun again, but overall was just fine. The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, 5-star read, absolutely excellent book. I will point you to my weekly reads on that, where I was, I think, a little bit better at pointing out the themes and talking about it, but absolutely fantastic, really nuanced discussion of escapism in modern society, and how it's kind of seen as diminutive in art, as well as not being productive, obviously, and sort of childish in removing yourself from modernity, basically. But how essential it is to get by in organized society as we have, and depending on what your life has been like, maybe a necessary thing to engage in from time to time, and not something that should be shat on so often. Next was Matrix by Lauren Groff, 4-star read. This was absolutely excellent, although my weekly reads was a little bit comical because I looked for the name of the character, Marie de France, on the blurb, and the first name that I saw was Eleanor of Aquitaine, and I'm pretty sure I conflated the two, at least at one point in the video. But it's definitely about Marie. And this is about a woman who's essentially exiled from court. It's historical fiction and fairly more extrapolated than what you would typically see. It's not, I think, too concerned with being historically accurate. She gets sent to an abbey, and it charts her sort of life in becoming an abbess from a very angry, rightfully so, woman at being sent there. It's sapphic, it's queer, it's very interesting. I thought that the workings and sort of politicking of an abbey would be kind of boring, but it's actually riveting, or at least I thought so. The voice crafted for Marie is absolutely excellent. Dialogue on point. I really liked this book. I gave it 4 stars if I didn't already mention. Life in the City of Dirty Water, A Memory of Healing, Clayton Thomas-Muller. I gave this 3 stars. I mostly wanted to look at this book to see what his interactions with the oil pipeline have been and the oil sands north of me. And it kind of didn't go into that as much. It's much more in a, I would say, like a biography than a memoir. And unlike the title sort of suggests, it more focuses on being a product of your environment as an Indigenous person and trying to work your way out of the systemic racist institutions that are compartmentalizing you and profiling you and trying to put you in the same box as everybody else, and then sort of finding your own way to be the thing that you want to be without even maybe having the opportunity to realize what that is in a system as it is set up here in Canada. It was a 3-star read for me, but I could easily see how it would be higher star rating for other people that would be more interested in the granular life that he led leading up to his activist roots. Then I read The Leavers by Lisa Coe. This was excellent. I gave this 4 stars. I thought I was a little bit burned out on immigrant stories, and this was exactly the sort of like tilt that I needed on it. It shows the mother and son who have immigrated from, I can't remember. I think it is China, mainland China somewhere. And what ends up happening is they're working illegally, of course, and their family is broken up at one point in his life, and he never hears from his mother again. And so we alternate between his childhood and his adulthood, when he's kind of trying to reconnect with her or find her and find out anything about what had happened. He lost everybody and then got put into the system, and a whole bunch of stuff happens to this guy. And then the mother, when we do jump to her perspective, I thought was much more riveting than the boy, just because he's kind of a not as interesting character and a bit of a dick, and while he has reason to be, it makes for a less interesting story. But the contrast between the two strikes like a perfect balance for me. The mother was just so interesting because she was recontextualizing the things that we learned about his childhood from him. And so it's a really good method of showing how there's 2 different sides to what is happening. Also kind of showing toxic masculinity, the myth of the American dream. The ending was great. I just really liked it more than I expected it to, and I gave it 4 stars. Similarly, Fingersmith, 4 stars. I went into this more so in the weekly reads, but Fingersmith was really compelling to me because I had seen The Handmaiden first, which I think is actually superior to the book in many ways, but the voice in this is just excellent. Even though it was slow moving and really ponderous and changed the narrative tension at the end of the book in a way that I really didn't like and felt completely unnecessary. The voice was always compelling. Descriptions were absolutely excellent. Every section of the book, which switches into a different viewpoint of the character, had a nice little twist to it. It really felt capery, but in Victorian England. And it's just really fun. So if you start this book and you don't click with the voice, I would say probably put it down, because it's not going to get better for you from there. But for me, it worked very well, definitely exceeded my expectations. Next is Unreconciled, Family Truth and Indigenous Resistance by Jesse Wendt. This is 4 stars. Again, something that exceeded my expectations. I didn't know anything about him, so it was kind of easy to blow my expectations away, knowing nothing. He is an Indigenous person who went to, I can't remember what university, but got a degree in film studies and then started working in the industry, became a critic, and the more that he inserted his own voice into his critique and not just the kind of like milquetoast Western insert narrative here about the thing that you're consuming while removing your own subjectivity from it. So old school versus new school journalism, essentially. He became like more happy, obviously, more interested in his own work, and his critique of Avatar, for instance, being very problematic in terms of Indigenous representation is something that I think everybody knows about, but I didn't know it originated from him. It was a great book, very interesting. If you liked Inconvenient Indian and like the parts where he specifically was talking about film study stuff, this is that book, but even more learned and articulate and interesting in my opinion, so I would definitely pick it up. Next, wrote Allowance Era. Katharina Vermette concluded that graphic novel that I was reading. I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was an okay ending that became strange when it tried to insinuate that Echo was time traveling when before it was clearly a daydream or like happened when she was actually sleeping. And so it was trying to draw on the aspect of generational memory, but literalizing it in a way that didn't make sense for the setting. So that took away a star for me. Next, I read DECA Warriors by Cole Pauls. This was great, 4-star comic, bombastic, very unique in its way of substituting some English words into 3 different kinds of Indigenous language, I believe, from the Yukon. And so it kind of gives kids the opportunity, or teenagers the opportunity, to learn certain words and phrases in a fun way with a comic book that's SFF, with very deep Indigenous roots that parallel certain events that happen in Canadian history. The artwork wasn't specifically amazing for me, but just for the concept alone and how it was executed, it deserved its 4-star rating. Then I read a compendium of Terry Pratchett books, first of which was Pyramids, which I gave 3 stars. I thought that was fine. It was definitely the most problematic content that I've seen from Terry Pratchett. It felt like he didn't have a handle on what he was doing, essentially. And it's generally the definition of what cultural appropriation looks like. So it's not something I would recommend to everybody, but it was a fun read, and as usual with his books, they have an interesting theme and through line for them. There was a part of him outwitting a sphinx at one time, which was very fun, and it's about the son of the the analogous emperor who has to assume the throne and give up what he wants to do, essentially, but more precisely in exploration of traditional values versus new values, and finding the right balance in your voice and your personhood and in your leadership when you're about to take over a country, ostensibly, to sort of not appeal to every aspect, but understand every aspect of what is out there and around you and the benefits of that, which is a good message to have all around. Then I read Small Gods, which was my favorite Terry Pratchett so far. This is a 4-star read, and it was about A god who gets, I think, reincarnated into a very small little tortoise. There's one believer in a temple who is full of followers or believers in that god, but we find out that they don't truly believe in him. They believe in a amalgamation and an extrapolation of what he said that was very subjectively defined by them. So it's basically Christianity. And they go on a journey in order to sort of keep him alive, because his essence or his substance, his entity, is only allowed to persist in this world if people believe in him. So it's very like, not Good Omens, but American Gods in that way. And they're trying to sort of bring him back into prominence, and hilarity ensues, basically, right? But it is so nuanced and interesting at discussing religion in I think a very respectable way. And it is so good at pitting atheism against belief and really driving home the importance of believing in something, at least for the human experience, basically. The human nature, whatever you want to call it, spirituality of a being. The belief in something is very important, and in this it's literalized, like the entity doesn't exist without the belief in itself. But yeah, just probably the most nuanced discussion or explanation or examination of atheism versus X religion ever. And so that kind of blew me away. Then the last book in the Gods trilogy for Terry Pratchett was Hogfather, which I read for December in that read-along, although I finished it in like a day anyway. This I gave 3 stars. It's fun, it's silly. Again, it's sort of driving home the importance of belief. The Santa Claus / Hogfather has been ostensibly assassinated by a person named Tea Time, which is just a great name, in a very interesting way as well that I didn't really see coming. And it's up to Death and his granddaughter, I believe, Susan, who's MVP of this book for sure, to, save the holidays. And so the through line is about belief. It's more silly and bombastic than all the other ones that I've read, so it was mostly just a fine book for me. It's probably the least favorite one that I've read overall, just because I'm not super into gonzo and super into the kind of satire that was being put on display at rapid pace in this book. But it was completely fine. I read Leviathan Falls, the last book for The Expanse, number 9. I thought the ending in this was fine. I don't want to go too into detail with it because most people either know and probably are reading it right now, or just don't care about The Expanse and haven't read it. But basically I thought it was completely fine, a little bit predictable, very safe. The epilogue I hated so much. But overall, the ending made sense, and the fact that they landed an ending for a 9-book series that was fine and satisfying is more than enough for me. Next was Disability Visibility, First-Person Stories for the 21st Century by Alice Wong, edited by Alice Wong. There's a lot of different essays. A lot of them were very surprising to me. I'm sure if you are already aware and have a very comprehensive view of disability, then this book would be less surprising. I thought I did, and so this book is kind of, for me, it's opened me up to the ways in which disability interacts with our personhood and our systemic issues in ways that I hadn't considered, even though I thought that I had a fairly comprehensive view of them. And so I was just very interested in the book overall. The writing, of course, is quite varied. It's uneven, I guess you could say. Much like a short story collection, there are things that hit, some things you already know, some things that don't really work that great. But overall, I thought it was 4 stars, definitely worth reading. And I'm sure there's at least 1 or 2 or 3 of these stories that will make you think about disability in a different way than you have already, probably. Next is Everyone Knows Your Mother is a Witch by Rivka Gulshan. This is a Writers' Trust nomination for Canada, and I thought this was great. 4 stars. This is not really my cup of tea because I don't generally care about witch trials anymore. It just seems hit on the head in so many different ways. But this is a small town in Germany doing a witch trial because the neighbor of a person who is like a holistic medicine person gave a concoction to their neighbor in order to try to help the daughters who were really sick, but it doesn't work. They end up dying, and then the man, I believe, possibly both of them, end up trying to, toss into the pyre, basically. And so this is it's like a literal witch trial in that there are testimonials from a whole bunch of different groups of people giving evidence in very eclectic and odd ways, which makes it eccentric, compelling, different, really good at world building and inputting information about the setting in very clever dialogue, I thought. And so just that off-kilter, somewhat different approach to the trial was just so interesting, and the narration was impeccable. This woman could do 18 different voices from men to women, give them all different personality and inflections. It was so compelling. I just really liked it. I gave it 4 stars, and then I bought the book. Next was Bewilderment, Richard Powers, or as I like to call it, the Disney movie that is coming for all of us. So I don't really like this book because I don't find the tone compelling, interesting, nuanced, or believable whatsoever. I think it was very Crayola, very after-school specials, sickly sweet, and predictable in plot completely, including the ending. It feels exactly like every 90s Disney movie that's either sports movies or inspirational movies or whatever. It's like Iron Will all over again. Next is On Juneteenth, Annette Gordon Reed. I gave this 4 stars. This was about Juneteenth, but as it specifically relates to Texas, to where it originated, I believe. And it's surprisingly nuanced in the way that it tackles the subject about slavery, primarily when it was enacted or disbanded, and the steps that it took to get there even after it was instituted. Because most people just assume that, it passed from on high, and then it was over. But there was a lot more stuff to it than that. It also surprisingly took in a whole bunch of different information about indigenous people and how it related to slavery that I had no idea about and found fascinating and horrifying, and everything else in this book is pretty horrifying. I think when you read a book on Juneteenth, you are prepared to engage with all of the subject matter that it presents, though, for sure. But definitely recommend it. Great audiobook. Then I read Remina by Junji Ito. This I gave 2 stars. I thought that it has a very good theme and it was interesting, but it did not execute it. It got more gonzo. It got more surrealistic, if you could say that. It slowly unraveled into making very little sense, basically. And this is about an astrologer who finds a wormhole, which a planet comes from, and he dubs the planet Remina, which is the name of his daughter. Society then, because of the name association and the fact that the planet is hurtling towards Earth, ostensibly to kill everything in its path, including Earth and everybody on it, then associates Remina with a sort of sacrifice that might destroy the planet for whatever reason. So it's a very madness of crowds thing. as well as commentary on fame, I think, at least in the beginning. But then it just becomes about just bombastic, wild, post-apocalyptic, trying to survive the madness of crowds thing even more so, and it just kind of was interminable. Then I read The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. I gave this 4 stars. This is about a woman who is great in her field. I think the pioneering person who made it possible for clones to be created. But her personal life is in shambles, basically. Her ex-husband now, or soon-to-be ex-husband anyway, the former man of her life, has cloned her into a more like docile and, you know, all the ways that you would think a douche man would want his wife to be: subservient, sexual, blah, blah, blah. But when that woman calls her to the apartment, she finds that the guy, Nick, has been murdered. And so there's like a really kind of interesting interplay between feminism and women's rights and dynamics between men and women in the workplace, succeeding in the workplace as a woman, being seen as a lot of negative qualities when you're in the top of your field, and possessing the same qualities that a man has in the field and being viewed in a different way, as well as like a murder mystery thing happening, and how are they going to navigate that, what's going to happen from there. It's not going to like blow your mind or anything. It's contemporary fiction, but it was great. Next I read In the Woods, which did blow my mind, kind of. This is Tana French. It's behind me, I think. So this book I will do a separate video on. I think I have so much to say about it, but it is a very interesting critique of the sort of noir, toxic masculinity, drinking partner of a mystery crime novel thing, archetype that you would see, as well as being a really interesting story. You will definitely, or at least probably, know who the killer is in the story, but it's more like a whodunit, and also primarily, at least for me, the A-plot was the interplay between the dynamics of Rob, the toxic POS of which we're getting the story, and Cassie, the partner. Then we also have the interplay between the 2 murders. A child is murdered in the present day, and it ends up maybe, or maybe not, tying into the past of Rob's, in which when he was a kid in this small town, he and 2 friends ran into the forest, and he was the only one that came out of, and he has like a mental block about it. And of course doesn't see therapy or tries to do anything about it really, and sort of his spiraling on the case from there, where he's desperately trying to uncover things about his past, as well as solve the case, as well as kind of maintain this weird equilibrium with Cassie. But the A-plot for me was definitely the relationship between he and Cassie and what happens to it, and I found all of it to just be absolutely excellent. Especially the voice is very lyrical. It takes place in small town Ireland, and it's very descriptive writing, excellent specificity. It's the best contemporary upmarket fiction that I've probably ever read in terms of construction like that. Then I read Punch Me Up to the Gods, a memoir, Brian Broom. This is 4 stars. This is about a queer black boy who is growing up in, I can't remember the city anymore. I think it's Philadelphia. Not married to that idea though. But he is really forthcoming, I found, about the complexities of queer culture intersections and how some of those are toxic to others. So he has married a sort of typical-ish structure of a memoir to him growing up, which I found very effective in and of itself, to a lot more nuanced interplay between that identity and his queer identity as he enters the, I don't know, subculture, as I guess you could say. I thought it was great. Next is The Harpy by Megan Hunter. I give this 4 stars. Unhinged women, you know I'm gonna like it. It's about a housewife who gets cheated on. She gives him 3 punishments at the time of her choosing, essentially. And it's about her becoming more feral and uncovering traumatic memories that she has in her past. So it's a Fraser book for sure. I thought it was great. I can't remember who recommended it to me. It might have been Amelia Reads. Whoever it was, thank you very much. I like the book a lot, and I am now looking out for a physical copy. Next is The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. I give this 4 stars. I still don't think I can talk about this very adequately. It's about a woman who is imprisoned for an inordinate amount of time, comes out having become sort of like erudite and learned in books and her identity as it relates to have consumed that much information in prison. And I think she even taught herself how to read and write in prison. Can't remember exactly. She begins working at a bookshop, and books themselves are not characters, but there's a lot of shorthand used in classics and new literature that are springboards for her to discuss things with people coming into the shop, and so kind of acts as like a rudimentary list of books that you yourself could read as well. I think in the back of the book there's even a list of all of the books at the end, so the idea is you could do that if you wanted to. I had read quite a bit of them, and it's nice to see other people's perspectives on them, and it was just a fascinating read. We find out that one of the regulars who comes into the bookshop has died and begins haunting our protagonist, and weird stuff starts happening. It becomes a vector for her to discover parts of her culture and begin interacting with people and aspects of her culture that she otherwise wouldn't have, at least ostensibly, at least not at that time anyway, certainly. And it had a fantastic ending and a really off-kilter, weird, kind of funny but kind of not sense about it. It's just a very strange book, and I am told that that's sort of her thing. This is the only book that I've read by her, but I thought it was great. I gave it 4 stars. Still can't speak very intelligently about it. Indian in the Cabinet, Speaking Truth to Power, Jody Wilson-Raybould. This is 4-star read. It's a memoir about her time in as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and the SNC-Lavalin affair is highly spotlighted, as you would expect. That's a small, well, it was big at the time anyway, tumultuous affair that came out of the Liberal Party when she was in power, and is the reason that she resigned and gave a very moving and powerful speech about the Liberals and leadership and a whole bunch of other stuff. But she's a very enigmatic person. You can tell that she has written mostly technical writing before. The narrative voice is weird. Like, it's very precise but not very readable or conversational. It's very odd crafting, but it will definitely communicate the things that you probably want to know about her. I think she's a very interesting politician. She has really awesome views on leadership. She has a very interesting viewpoint that was worth consuming. And I gave it 4 stars because it exceeded my expectations. Next is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Gave this 4 stars as well. Such a good voice is crafted in this book. It's just a joy to hear. I didn't read it. I consumed it on audiobook, of course, and the narrator was just completely fantastic in delivering it. It was just a great partnership on that. And this is about Agnes, who is the mother of Shakespeare's children, and she's the MVP of the story. It should be called Agnes. But obviously it's a story kind of about Hamnet, in that, as far as I'm aware anyway, some of the chapters are taken from certain parts of Shakespeare's plays all over the place, and then extrapolated to make this sort of narrative. So it's very extrapolated, it's not historically accurate as far as I'm aware, and it's got this like witchy, interesting historical fiction undercurrent about it that make it so compelling even when there's minutia, at least granular details about a life that I don't really care about. One of those things where they could just talk about anything and I would listen, voices. But the plot was overall fairly satisfying, and I thought that it may not have put as much emphasis on other characters as Agnes was, because everybody else pretty much faded to the background for me and was kind of whatever. And that made it kind of outshine itself in a way. The only kind of thing that remains visceral or easily recalled about the book is Agnes and not the plot. So that's why it's 4 stars instead of 5. Speaking of a 5-star book, Rules of Civility, Immortals, 5 stars. Excellent stuff. This is historical fiction about a girl in New York City, and it's the formative year of her life. A lot of different things happen. Her and her best friend transgress into the upper crust of New York City, and it's about classism, about New York at the time, about the war, but it's also about a girl who's sort of forced to grow up prematurely and to navigate this space that contrasts her life so vividly that it's like stark and hard to negotiate her life, and she has to continue to like move between these places in an almost like passing kind of way. But the voice is excellently crafted. The plot, though a little bit meandering, was just completely perfect for the tone and the setting and the voice, like the character. And another book where it could have easily been like another 100 or 200 pages and I wouldn't have cared. She could have talked about anything and I would have been fine. Next is A History of My Brief Body, Billy Ray Belcourt, 4 stars. This is a memoir by him. Its structure is its weakest point, I think. It's a grouping of essentially essays that more or less linearly progress with his childhood to adulthood, his queerdom, his growing up as an indigenous gay man, and academia, poetry, his craft work, kind of how it is like related to his selfhood. I thought, much like a short story, parts of this hit, parts of it didn't. I know other people have mentioned an aspect of it was problematic with his interaction, a sexual interaction with another gay man, but I don't know, I thought that it was very explicit that the author thought it was a problematic thing that he was exploring as well, and not something that was like something he condoned. It was like him participating in toxic culture and being sick about it, basically, but then people condemning him for it, which was a little strange to me. But as far as I know anyway, I thought it was respectful. It was very poetic. Next is Anathema by Neil Stevenson. I gave this 3 stars. Technically it told a story. Technically it worked, but most of it was interminable and poorly designed and constructed and not ideal for the format of the novel, in my opinion. It's about a futuristic society, I think extrapolated from Roman culture, in which they find a UFO, essentially, and they are a cloister of monastic people who are not religious but scientists, and they're put in these places because society fears them. They once created a more than powerful nuclear bomb and were kind of like locked away in these sections that only open up in set intervals. I think it's like 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, something like that. But they all have to come together to solve this problem. If they are aliens, what do they want? Are they going to attack us? yada, yada, yada. The aspects of this book that are very good is when he's talking about the actual philosophical concepts, and the sort of nitty-gritty of the physics are super well articulated. I have to give him props for that. I think layman's like me, for sure, can easily understand and digest this very complex stuff. At least it's complex for me. About quantum physics, about those philosophical complex, the interplay between them, and how the things aliens would need to tackle in order to traverse time and space are a lot more complex than most people realize. However, as I said, the vehicle, the novel of conveying these things is not ideal. It's 1,000 pages. I would have preferred to just read an article on these things for sure. The characters are annoying, not well designed. Dialogue is incredibly terrible. It's doing that thing where it's essentially YA diction and dialogue character construction and all of that, except that it's billed as like an adult SFF thing, which is a fan favorite for people of that genre, basically. They have been conditioned to accept the strangest genre conventions of all time, in my opinion. But technically, it does work. Again, Neil Stephenson cannot write women whatsoever, not even remotely. The guys are all sort of like, I don't know, almost like incel nerds or something is basically what they sound like. They're negotiating gender dynamics and very like masturbatory a lot of the time in the interplay between their social skills versus their knowledge. And they sound like mostly idiots all of the time until somehow they start speaking very articulately about all of this scientific stuff. So it's jarring, it's weird, I don't know why people like this book as much as they do. Most people seem to be just considering it an idea book, and if that's the case, you should compare if the format is ideal for those ideas or not, right? And for me, it's not even remotely. And that's all I have to say about that. Next is Hell of a Book by Jason Mott, 4 stars. This was mostly excellent. It's a strange book. It's a book about an author who wrote a book called A Hell of a Book, and he is basically, we're probably going to assume that it's autofiction, right? That it's the author of this book. And in some ways, I think it might be, in other ways not. But he has a disorder, which Malka Older would call a narrative disorder, which is a vivid imagination. The stories that he tells himself become real and interactive, like hybrid reality, basically. And so he has to sort of negotiate his life from a young age, where he needs to develop mechanisms in which he can interact with those things without freaking people out, right? He begins to see, after his writing and publication of Hell of a Book, a young black boy who wants to be seen by him. And he claims that he has the superpower of not being seen by anyone unless he wants them to be seen. And we start to develop these themes and plot that is jumping back and forth between the author's present, where he's learning about media engagement and the publishing industry, what's demanded of him as the author or the author function, or all of these different things, versus maybe his childhood. We don't know. This black boy's childhood, we don't know. Very interesting. I would definitely recommend it to just about anybody. I think most people would get on with the book, even if they didn't get everything they could out of the themes. It would be an enjoyable experience nonetheless. Next, I read The Searcher by Tana French on audio, and this time it worked. I tried before and the audio file was really jacked up. It kept like retreading old ground, and the chapters were mixed up and stuff. It was really weird. But this time I was able to listen to the whole thing, and I thought it was great. I gave it 4 stars. It's methodical, some would say plotting, but I would say meticulously crafted. It's about a retired cop from Chicago moving to a small town in Ireland. He forms a friendship with a young boy who has a brother that is missing. And the problem, I guess, is that the young boy wants him to search for him as a police officer who used to do something kind of adjacent to that. It's a very good book in terms of highlighting the themes of kind of like male cowardice in general, and like toxic masculinity, again, people not going to see therapists and getting help when they need it, confronting the problems that they have, and kind of backing themselves into a corner, whether they realize it or not, and then reacting to it. Then I finished The Likeness, the second book in the Dublin Murder Squad. Excellent book, also gave it 5 stars. The Searchers, by the way, I gave 4 stars if I didn't mention. The Likeness is about Cassie after the events of the first book. She's now working a different job, still a cop, of course, but doing domestic violence, I believe. And she gets called out to a crime scene and discovers that the woman looks exactly like her. And we find out from the police officer present, Frank, who tells her that she is also using the fake ID Cassie Maddox created, Lexi something, Mason? Lexi something, for the undercover assignment that she used and was alluded to back in the first book. And so they have an opportunity to embed her into this group to figure out who killed her and to keep quiet that she has been slain in an effort to thwart the killer and expose them, hopefully. So what happens is, instead of dealing with her problems and her emotional issues and PTSD probably from the previous case, she again sort of sidesteps dealing with all of that stuff and her depression by going into this job in a probably not great mental state. And it ends up being kind of like The Secret History. That group of people is almost like, not exactly the same, but if you like The Secret History, the dynamics between those friends, you should definitely read this book. It's so much like that and so enjoyable in the exact same way. Excellent book. It has so much to say about the way that a secret can like completely eat you up and turn you into a different person, and kind of without even you realizing it, as well as the tension between wanting badly to just become someone completely different when something gets difficult, instead of persevering as the person that you are and maintaining the good parts of you. Next, I read Uzumaki by Junji Ito. This is another 3-star read for me. At least I like this enough to give it 3 stars instead of 2 stars, even though it has the exact same problems. But the themes were just so interesting. It's about a small town in which people start seeing spirals. It's horror and grotesque, and very vividly grotesque. Each issue is sort of like a different person being consumed by a spiral in a different way. There is 2 main characters, a boy and a girl, who are boyfriend and girlfriend for no apparent reason whatsoever. They don't have any kind of chemistry or speak to each other in that mode or do anything in that mode. So I have no idea why that relationship is like that. In some issues, one of them isn't even present for, like it'll switch between the two. So I don't really get it. It's from the perspective of the girl though, and by the end of it, it kind of doesn't make sense that she's even telling the story, which is odd. It switches from these very single issue sort of feeling stuff in the world that does build on each other but is loosely connected, so you could just kind of read them whenever, it seems, to a full-on plot progression that is like apocalyptic, bombastic, and not very compelling, and sort of throws the interesting themes that it introduces out of the window again, which I did not like. Next, I read An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was interesting. I'm not going to say too much about this because it's a classic by now, like a modern classic probably. 3 stars. I thought it was fine. This also could have been like, should have been in email territory, but it mostly worked for what it was trying to do. It's about an artist who begins in the World War II to make propaganda that is like very patriotic and becomes completely out with the times as the events of the war unfold. And he's sort of seen as seditious and a traitor and stuff like that later on. And it's about the interplay between his memory, his culpability in the things that he does, and sort of just how he is treated by both sides, as well as his own inner turmoil, I guess you could say, about what he did and his relationship to it. Something that could have been a short story or severely truncated and didn't do that much for me, even though the concept is excellent. Next, I read Michael Kohlhaas, Heinrich von Kleist, translated by Michael... Oh, it's too hard to see. And this book was pretty bad. It was kind of billed as John Wick for medieval times, but plotting. And boy, like plotting. It's has no idea what aspects of the story are interesting and not. It goes super granular into details that are so innocuous and so boring that I can't imagine anyone caring about them. It's about a horse breeder who is wronged by a resident lord, essentially, when he has to go through a bureaucratic process to leave horses, and they're emaciated when he comes back and hard used, and then to get recompense because they chased off one of his servants who was a groomer and taking care of the horses. Allegations are made, but the lord is so well connected that nothing ever happens to him. His wife goes out to seek a petition from somebody higher up, and she's butted by the butt of a lance, as far as I remember, and she ends up dying from it. And so things escalate from there. He becomes a rebel. He starts going to the lord's house, burning it down, but the guy flees and stuff like that. And then it suddenly becomes very granular in a myopic way. It always maintains this like disaffected, never internal viewpoint of any of the characters, which is very frustrating. The dialogue isn't very good. The formatting is terrible. It's just walls of text for ages sometimes. It does not know when to use quotation marks properly. Like, even when it is direct language, sometimes it will be quotation marks and sometimes not. It's very strange. And it, like I said, just focuses on aspects of the story that are uninteresting. It's very Kafka-esque in its look at the machinations of bureaucratic law and like the institutions that the person has in order to get justice, and the stupidity of his being so compelled to seek this justice in this way that he becomes mindlessly recreating this same sort of injustice and circumstances on other people. So the theme is fine, but even at 112 pages, it's overlong. It's not very well written, in my opinion. We never really care about any of the characters. The setting is almost non-existent, and even the battles are somehow lackluster. So yeah, it was whatever. And then lastly, My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. This was a great book. It's not a easy book, and it's fairly depressing in its depiction of depression that is very accurate, I would say. It's very like, why are millennials sad all of the time? Affecting an interesting portrayal of a young woman who's well off yet not happy to a very high degree. She seeks out help in the way of pharmaceuticals and decides to just stay on drugs for like a complete year and check out and see what kind of person emerges. And she's lost in fugue states. It's very visceral in its depictions of sex sometimes. She's in a very like abusive, knowingly abusive relationship kind of deal with this banker Trevor, who's like a dude bro fuckboy basically, and continues to seek out things that don't nourish her, don't add anything to her life, and kind of ignores the things that do matter, and then continues to perpetuate that state through, you know, a psychiatrist that continues to, instead of do the work with her, prescribe pills. So I thought it was very astute. I thought it was feminist. I thought that it was very well written, compelling voice. It exceeded my expectations, and I gave it 4 stars. And now as the sun sets, that is the end of the monthly wrap-up. Let me know what you've been reading, if you liked any of these books, or if you thought I got anything wrong. Feel free to engage me in the comments in whichever way you feel like. And I will see you next year. Bye.